Hi everyone, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Carlos Diaz. I'm the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom. And I'm delighted to welcome you, those of you here and those of you watching online. Established by the legislature and the governor of the great state of Florida, the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom is a world-class, independent, nonpartisan think tank that aims to inform, to influence, and to inspire current and future leaders to develop and implement innovative, meaningful, and effective policies to advance economic and individual freedom and human prosperity, both in the United States and around the world. Today, we're really thrilled to welcome to the center the newest cohort of Senior Leadership Fellows, the Spring 2023 Senior Leadership Fellows. As many of you know, this program, the Senior Leadership Fellows Program, brings distinguished public servants who have worked at the highest levels of government and who have promoted, during their time in office, creative and innovative public policies that strengthen the free enterprise system and enhance individual freedom and human prosperity. These fellows are in residence at FIU for 1 semester and lead not-for-credit study groups on salient topics based on their experience. They also participate in talks and other events. They're available to meet with and mentor students and serve as a resource to our entire community. The way I look at it, this is the crown jewel of our efforts to educate and to mentor young leaders. The event will be in English, but President Frei will say his comments in Spanish. We have simultaneous translation. Do we have the headphones for people who need them? Can we get the headphones? If anybody needs them, there are going to be headphones right in the back. And if we can get one to President Frei as well, so that he can benefit from his colleagues' comments. So we'll get the headphones for anybody who needs simultaneous translation, and if we can get one for President Frei as well. And we need one for President Frei, and then for anybody who needs them, they're right in the back. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very brief introduction about each one of them. And I do emphasize very brief. These are amazing public servants, and I can be here the entire hour talking about their accomplishments. And so I'm going to be very brief in their introduction, and then I'm going to hand it over to them so they can give you some introductory remarks. I'll ask a few questions of them, and then I want you to ask any questions you want of our fellows. I'm going to begin with President Eduardo Frei, who served as President of the Republic of Chile from 1994 until 2000, was president during a really historic time. He's the second president after the return of democracy, after the military dictatorship, but he's really the first one who consolidated democracy in Chile. He was also, in addition to president, a senator for 18 years, the first time from 1990 until 1994, and the second time from the year 2000 until 2014. And in that period, he served as president of the Senate between 2006 and 2007. His government implemented important educational and judicial reforms at a critical time in his country's history. He also opened up Chile to the global economy. And so appropriately, the study group that he will be teaching to our students is called Crystallizing a Vision, the Chilean Journey to Development. To my right, President Alvaro Uribe, who served as President of the Republic of Colombia, was elected for the first time in the year 2002 and was re-elected in 2006. He also served as governor of the Department of Antioquia from 1995 until 1998, and also, like President Frei, was senator twice, the first time from 1986 until 1994, and the second time from 2014 until 2020, just recently. His administration led the fight against terrorist organizations, including the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC, and the National Liberation Army, the ELN. President George W. Bush of the United States awarded him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor presented to individuals who have made, and I'm quoting now, exemplary contributions to the prosperity, values, or security of the United States and world peace. He is currently leader of his party in Colombia, and his study group, The Rule of Law in Latin America, A Political Perspective, comes at a time when the region faces important economic and political challenges. To my left, we have Dr. Kiron Skinner,
who served as Director of Policy Planning at the United States Department of State between 2018 and 2019. She's a professor of international relations and politics at the Pepperdine University School of Public Service and has also taught at Carnegie Mellon University. She's also a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford and a fellow graduate of Harvard University, where he got her PhD. She has co-authored 2 books on Ronald Reagan, which became New York Times bestsellers, and was appointed also by President George W. Bush to a term on the National Security Education Board. I know that she's passionate not only about national security issues, but also about education. Her study group will focus on decisions and deciders, an inside look at economic and foreign policy. And our 4th fellow, who is with us, I believe, by Zoom, can we get her on? She, in a couple of weeks, she is an amazing public servant without a country, from Afghanistan, and so she's right now in London and is not able to enter the US for another couple of weeks. Fawzia Koofi, she's the former Vice President of the National Assembly of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, where she served from 2005 until 2021, when the Taliban took over. In that capacity, she served as the first Deputy Speaker of the lower house of Parliament. She has an amazing story to tell, as you're about to hear. She's a prominent advocate for women's rights and has been a vocal critic, as you can imagine, of the Taliban and other extremist groups in Afghanistan. She's also a member of the Pashtun ethnic group and has worked tirelessly to promote ethnic unity in her native country. She has been recognized for her work both nationally and internationally, receiving several awards and honors for her advocacy and leadership. Recently, she participated in the peace talks in Doha, Qatar, with the Taliban. She will share her personal experiences and leadership lessons with her study group titled Women in Leadership, the Fight for Democracy and Freedom in Post-Conflict Societies. What a group of individuals. We're very, very honored and inspired by their stories. Thank you. So what I'm going to ask now is for each of them to just say a few words, perhaps talk about their study groups, talk about anything they want. And then I'm going to ask each one of them a question about the political realities facing their countries. I'll ask a question about all of them combined. I'll ask them to give a few words of inspiration to the young people here in the audience and watching online. And then I'm going to let the audience ask any questions they want of our amazing fellows. So we'll begin. Let's begin. President Frei. And again, if you need translation, you can get the headphones in the back.
Gracias, Carlos. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer la invitación y agradecer esta oportunidad que me da este instituto de estudios, un centro que busca la libertad económica en el mundo, y una de las razones principales también por la cual he querido estar presente es compartir con los estudiantes que van a participar algunos temas que son de interés latinoamericano, que han pasado en Chile, que han pasado en otras naciones latinoamericanas, y por lo tanto, dentro de los módulos que voy a entregar va a estar, por ejemplo, todo el proceso que ha vivido Chile en los últimos 3 años de una nueva constitución, en qué está, en qué situación de avance y de retroceso y cuáles son las alternativas. También quiero explicar cuál ha sido el avance de Chile al adoptar políticas de libre comercio. En los años 90 Chile era un país cerrado al mundo, todo el comercio de Chile estaba entre Estados Unidos, la Unión Europea y Latinoamérica, y a partir de los años 90 cambiamos esa realidad y hoy día estamos en todo el mundo, tenemos tratados de libre comercio con más de 68 países del mundo que representan casi entre el 70 y 80 del PIB mundial y de la población mundial. Por eso hoy día nuestra economía está prácticamente en el comercio exterior. Y el año pasado, después de todo el proceso del COVID, etcétera, y los cambios en la economía mundial producto de la recesión que se ha producido, sigue siendo casi el 2/3 del PIB de Chile está en el comercio exterior. Eso hace 25, 30 años era imposible. Por lo tanto, es un país abierto al mundo, es un país que construye con una democracia que está con dificultades, pero que ha ido año a año consolidando su situación. También podemos tocar en estas conversaciones el tema de política de derechos humanos, podemos hablar de las modificaciones que me tocó iniciar como presidente en el tema de modernización del Estado. Hice la gran reforma de la justicia después de 100 años que nunca habíamos tenido en Chile, y eso permitió que a partir del año 2000 se comenzaran a abrir todos los juicios de derechos humanos en nuestro país. Y otra razón, no quiero detallar más porque eso es parte de cada uno de los módulos que vamos a conversar. Yo quiero en esta oportunidad aprovechar esta invitación del Centro de Adam Smith porque hay una pregunta subyacente que yo he escuchado las veces que he venido en estos últimos días, ya preparándome para ingresar. Es que, ¿cuál es la visión que tenemos en América Latina respecto a la política exterior de Estados Unidos con respecto a América Latina? Y yo he tenido la suerte de ser hijo de un presidente de Chile, el presidente Frei Montalva, inauguró su gobierno en el año 64 hasta el año 70, y por lo tanto, desde esa época yo era estudiante universitario, así que vi lo que eran las relaciones de Chile con Estados Unidos, y después, hasta que me tocó vivirla a mí personalmente. Así que yo tengo una posición crítica de la política de Estados Unidos.
Y ahora le preguntaré entonces.
Voy a dar un solo ejemplo. Chile en estos últimos 3 años ha vivido una etapa fundamental de su desarrollo y de la nueva Constitución. Durante 3 años y medio nunca tuvimos embajador de Estados Unidos en nuestro país. Entonces, uno dice, ¿por qué? ¿Por qué sucede en esta situación? Eso es materia de la conversación y de lo que podamos conversar en este tiempo.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Presidente Uribe.
Thank you, Carlos. Distinguished colleagues, señoras, señores, I am very proud because of this kind invitation. It is a great honor for me because I am a political fighter. And although I am 70, I continue fighting every day and every night. I am not 70, I am 140. But today I am in shock because I don't like to speak about many attempts against my life. But I remember that day, December 9, 1992. Julian was here, and I didn't know him. He was a student, very outstanding student. He was granted a scholarship from Ecopetrol, the most important Colombian oil corporation. And that night, the ILN, the second largest guerrilla group, exploded bombs in the building where we live. I rescued him. And my apartment was destroyed. And now you see him with a beautiful family. Juliana, I am in shock. I have to send our photography to my family tonight. Colombia, in the last century, had the longest democracy all over the region. Mexico had only 13 years of democratic interruption, Colombia 4. In the last century, Colombia never defaulted. Many Latin American countries defaulted. Colombia didn't have hyperinflation. Our economy was very well managed. However, in the year 2002, Colombia had very high rate of poverty, low rate of private investment, and a lot of violence. In Latin America, we have to ask what we need. In my opinion, we need, in many countries, to recover freedoms. In other countries, to consolidate freedoms. And what is the way for freedom consolidation? The rule of law. For I want to analyze with the students element by element of the rule of law. Security in 3 expressions: physical, political, and legal. The interrelation the mutual dependency between social cohesion and private investment. Without private investment, it is impossible to go deeper in social cohesion. And without social cohesion, it is impossible to legitimize private investment. We need independent institutions. In Latin America, we have countries without judiciary independence, without independent electoral bodies. We are going to talk with the students about all the elements that constitute the rule of law. And of course, I am open to answer all the questions about all the controversies along my very long political life that so far continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Skinner?
It's so wonderful to be here, Carlos. We served together in the Trump administration, and we lived to tell the story. So I'm just grateful to you for the work you did in Washington and for returning home and coming to FIU to build this center of free thought. There's so few places left in the American Academy where we can talk about freedom. And there's no religious liberty without freedom. There's no racial justice without freedom. There's no social justice without freedom. You can't talk about freedom too much. And much of what we talk about in the vein of freedom, of having civil dialogue and civil discourse, is really an attempt to quash freedom at its very core. So I really applaud what you're doing, and thank you. It's so important.
Thank you.
But it's not just important in the United States, it's important in worldwide. And although I don't think the mandate of this particular seminar or collection of teachers, as I guess we're called this semester, was to be about Latin America, but there will be a lot of overlap in our conversation about Latin America and Afghanistan and places where freedom is also being challenged. It's a global phenomenon, and the Americas, I believe, are ground zero for the future of the world in terms of what the collection of countries can do in defense of all of the things that most of us believe in the big Western tent. My course is called, I think, Decisions and Deciders or something along those lines, but the main goal of what I'm doing is to take the very diverse and interesting group of students whom I met with for almost 2 hours today and bring them literally into the room where decisions have been made over many decades. So every week they will be introduced to former White House, Defense, State Department, and other officials who worked on foreign and economic policy for this century and some even in earlier periods. You know, it's interesting. American presidential elections are kind of global elections. Everyone watches what we're doing. And then we have a big election, we mobilize ourselves, and presidents decide to fill their cabinets and their sub-cabinets and throughout the government. And the people who obtain those jobs they don't look often like the people who campaigned for the president. And my course is really an attempt to correct that problem. It takes, and I might be off a few points here and there, but if you think about the presidential race for a Republican presidential candidate, he or she will need at least 15% of the black vote. And I think the black vote is particularly important, not because it's more important than other votes, but it's the first consistent non-white vote in the United States because of the party of Lincoln. The Hispanic vote is the biggest and fastest growing non-white vote in the United States. And the Asian vote is mattering more because Asians at one point in our history were less politically active, but that has changed. Where the black vote matters is that I think it's the lead indicator for the non-white vote. One, as I just said, because it was the first major collection of non-white voters, especially for the Republican Party. But because it's also politically organized over such a long time, there's an infrastructure there that I think influences the others. But taken together, this is the new America. And we have been content, for the most part, to campaign for candidates and really wish them well, but not be in the room when decisions about war and death, peace and prosperity are made. The sheer number of young people coming up in this new and more diverse America will make it almost impossible to have a small ruling elite in Washington make decisions for us. The goal of my course is, again, to open the door so that people can peer into what it's like to be in the Situation Room in the White House, to be in a cabinet meeting, to be on the 7th floor of the State Department, to be in the center of the Pentagon, where big decisions are made. And I believe that with the speakers I'm bringing in, the commitment that they have to the future of our nation, that some subset of my FIU cohort will end up in Washington before you know it. I may be working for them. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kiron. Thank you. We have had an amazing group of fellows so far, former presidents, cabinet members, members of Congress. They've all been from the Western Hemisphere so far, a lot from Latin America and from the United States. And now we have the first one not from the Western Hemisphere. So Fawzia, I'm really, really excited to have you join us. Hopefully you can come to the US in a couple of weeks when you get the permission. Her class will be in person. All the classes are in person, none of this Zoom stuff. But because she couldn't get here in time to be with us, she's joining us from London, I believe, by Zoom, but she'll be here before you know it. So, Fawzia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I really wish I was there in person to be part of, physically part of this wonderful group of people I was listening to. Very inspiring. Thank you also for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences and to learn also as I'm expecting. As you said, my name is Fawzia Koofi. I'm from Afghanistan. I have lived in Afghanistan all my life. However, I was forced to leave last year after the fall of Taliban. I wanted to stay there. I was there for a few weeks, but it became literally difficult. I was under house arrest. And after Taliban back-to-back repressive measures against women, I found it impossible to continue my life. So I left, and since I left Afghanistan, I have been advocating for a political settlement for women's rights across the world. In this course, I'm hoping that I will share my experience. I'm sure a lot of students in FIU hear about Afghanistan through the media and about the region and beyond, and about the US and international community engagement, what role they can play, what role the regional countries can play in shaping the politics in Afghanistan, what role the leaders could play, what is at stake for Afghanistan. I'm hoping to share my experience, my personal experience, because I have been part of ups and downs of politics in the last 4 decades in Afghanistan, actively participating in politics post-2001, including, being in the room with the Taliban negotiating about the future of my country. Of course, with a group that would not recognize women as an equal rights holder, but I was hoping to give it a chance and to experience coexistent, a political settlement that will result coexistent. But obviously, it did not go the way we had planned, and everything collapsed. We have still not given up. We are still trying every possible leverage for a political settlement. So in this course, I'm hoping to share my personal experience throughout the process, but also how women could play their role in terms of, building a post-conflict societies and bringing democracy. Because many occasions, I think the perspective from West part of the world toward my part of the world is that democracy is an imported project. I would like to, talk about whether democracy is an imported project or democracy is part of the culture of people in East as well. So very much looking forward to my engagement with FIU and with sharing my experience with people, because they won't be able to only hear from the media, but from somebody who has been impacted, but also making an impact. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to ask each of you a few questions. And Fawzia, let me begin the questions with you, because you come from a part of the world that is not easy, a tough neighborhood. Many would consider the U.S. pullout of Afghanistan not to be our greatest achievement, to put it mildly. Some would say it was a disaster. Can you give us your thoughts as to, you know, how that worked out, what happened immediately after the U.S. left, and you have some very interesting stories about even your personal safety as a result of the turmoil that has been plaguing Afghanistan for so long.
Absolutely. No, on the 4th of July, 2021, when the last American soldier left Bagram Air Base, the major military air base, I remember that a lot of security forces from my own area, from my district, from my village, started fleeing their security checkposts, and districts started falling to Taliban one after the other. I think on a general note, nobody wants any foreign troops to be in their country forever. We definitely didn't want American or the NATO presence in Afghanistan forever, but I think there was a better way to manage this withdrawal. I think the way it was managed and the way it was announced greatly contributed to the collapse. On the 13th of April 2021, when President Biden announced withdrawal, I was in the negotiation with Taliban. They no longer committed their time to negotiate because they believe they're going to win anyways. And since then, the morale of our security forces, that we all have invested our time, you had invested your sons, your daughters, invested blood and treasure to help our troops be who they were, a national army. They started losing their morale, and that was the time that everybody could predict the collapse. But the way it happened was never predicted. I think it was after the former president fled Afghanistan. However, now we are in a situation that the United States is losing a possible leverage that they have in the region. So what I am requesting is, before you lose all the leverage in shaping in trying to influence a political settlement for a global security and for a safer world, I think we all have to work for a political settlement, because I think there is now the growth of regional dynamics. Obviously, different countries, power holders in the region, they're trying to influence the situation more with an economic motive. And that empowers Taliban and minimizes the United States leverage. But I'm hoping to share more of this during my classes. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you. So speaking of U.S. foreign policy, I believe that the biggest threat facing the United States right now is, in my opinion, without a doubt, a rising China. What the communist Chinese are able to do to the United States long term. You disagree with me on this one. Why is China not the biggest threat facing the United States right now?
Well, we talked about this in my study group a little while ago. China has become, I think, the bipartisan target, and it seems that every generation or so, U.S. foreign policy needs an enemy or an adversary to focus on, to galvanize thinking, resources, to make the Pentagon work. The State Department now has something I think called the China House. I'm not sure exactly what that will do. It's okay and it's appropriate to think about China as a great power competitor that has a global reach that's unprecedented and a challenger for the United States in many ways. It's simultaneously an economic, political, military, and strategic competitor We really didn't have that in the Soviet Union in the Cold War. But if you put it in perspective, China doesn't really have a chance to challenge the United States or the West. If Washington comes to understand that there are a collection of countries that are central to our security, to the growth of the West, prosperity and freedom, and I'm talking about what we sometimes call the global South. Those countries like India, Pakistan, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, others, with them in a broad kind of Western tent, we have the most powerful collection of countries on earth. Without them, I think no matter how we mobilize our national resources to combat China, we lose. So this is an era in which the world is very different than the one that U.S. Foreign policy experts happen to believe we're in. After World War II, the U.S. was the undisputed power in the world. Military power, had nuclear weapons to itself until soon thereafter when the Soviet Union came online and controlled the global share of GDP. That's no longer the case. There are many nations in the nuclear club. The U.S. is still a great economic power, but there are other economic powers as well. I think the focus on China, given our history of one enemy at a time and putting billions, if not trillions, of resources into combating that enemy at the expense of looking at what's happening more broadly on the chessboard, is a huge mistake. I put my time and energy into building a grand strategy around a host of nations that are the future in terms of population, resources, technology, and potential. And those are some that I just mentioned.
But for those of us who believe that China is the biggest threat, I think we're not really in contradiction, right? Because paying attention to the global South and working with our partners in the global South could also help us stop what is a growing influence of China in this part of the world as well.
Yeah, I do think there's a bit of a contradiction, though, because we don't seem to do many grand strategies well at once. And the one on China, I think, has the potential to take us down rabbit holes that will waste lots of time. And what I've seen so far, it's not about building secure regional partnerships where the United States is not always in the lead. Now, you could say we have the Indo-Pacific Quad, India, Japan, US, and Australia. That's a good model, but it's not exactly what I'm talking about. It's those nations that we just don't have a strategy around, regions of the world like South America, Latin America, the African continent. The future's there. The African continent in particular is the future of the world's population. And I think we have to have relationships and strategies and engagements that are in place to deal with any threat that we face. China is, I think, not 10 feet tall, the way it's being portrayed. And once we make a nation 10 feet tall, we organize ourselves against it. And in some ways, that's what we did with the global war on terror for almost 2 decades. And then we don't do other things. And that worries me.
I'll ask you about U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America in a few seconds, but President Uribe, your successor, President Santos, I think it's safe to say, would not have been elected without your help. And his successor, President Duque, who's also affiliated with our center, would not have been elected without your support. In the case of the current president of Colombia, President Petro, clearly we can't say the same thing. Very different type of president. Many people are concerned about the direction that he's taking Colombia. You just arrived from Bogota. Can you give us your thoughts as to what's happening in Colombia right now? Should we be concerned about the direction that President Petro is taking Colombia?
Carlos, but you cannot forget that I supported the election of President Petro as well, because the great majority of my adversaries voted for him. President, my stand on this moment is to be in the opposition, but at the same time to fertilize, to support channel of communications with President Petro. I still keep the hope that the outcomes of President Petro won't be radicals as his speeches have been. Of course, we are concerned because of the tax reform already in place, because of his announcements on pension reform, on health reform. Last Saturday, I made public a paper with all the arguments against the proposed health reform. We are concerned because of the announcement of the labor reform, the size of the government, the trend to eliminate room for the private sector and to fill the room with the expansion of official bureaucracy. However, we are working to build a democratic opposition and to look for the well-being of the country. With all my concerns, with all our concerns, my opposition will continue being an opposition with ideas, with alternatives, with dialogue. In politics, you have to be happy, optimistic every day. I am concerned, but not unhappy. I am worried, but not sad. Therefore, I will continue fighting for the country. We believe in a country with safe country, with private initiative, with social cohesion. At the same time, we believe in an economy of fraternity against the social class hatred. These are some of the ideas leading us. This is a difficult moment, Carlos, and I confess with humbleness that I do not have total clarity in my mind. Observing each moment, observing the country, talking to the people, listening to the people day and night, we need to advance in clarifying our mind. And of course, if President Petro could consider that Colombia is very polarized, and if he considers that all of us have a duty to diminish the polarization of our country, the outcome of President Petro could be not as concerning as we see his speeches today.
Let me ask you a follow-up question. I tend to look at Latin America from the point of view of U.S. foreign policy towards Latin America. There has been no closest, most loyal partner for the United States in South America than Colombia. Should the United States be concerned about the direction that Petro is taking Colombia?
I cannot miss to refer to some of the main points of this bilateral relationship. I receive a lot of help from the United States during my 2 terms as president. I have to recognize that we improved in Colombia. We reduced violence, we increased private investment, we advanced in social cohesion, we reduced poverty. The help of the United States was very important, but the help of the United States, without the determination of our government, of our people, would have been useless. It was useful because there was a combination, the help of the United States and the determination in our government, in our people. My predecessor, President Pastrana, signed Plan Colombia. Every day we have to recognize that this was a great step forward to recover Colombia. And during the financial crisis of the year 28 that began with Lehman Brothers, the United States contributed to the expansion of capital in the IDB. It was very important for Latin America at this moment. Regarding my country, the United States changed totally this policy with the support to the peace agreement with FARC. I will give my metrics to explain to the students my point of view against this agreement, because it was an agreement of submission to FARC, not a peace agreement. At this moment, I see that the United States has in Latin America some challenges. Its negotiation with the government of Venezuela, how will the negotiation impact Venezuela? How will the United States and the democratic world as a whole work to have in Venezuela truly democratic elections, transparent elections? It is a very big challenge at this moment. And I don't know what the United States, what will be its approach in the coming years to our country. I cannot say anything at this moment, Carlos. We have to wait.
But there's hope.
Concern. This is within my basket of concerns.
Colombia has been a model of democracy for many decades, and with the exception of the military dictatorship, Chile has also been an important model of democracy. Since the end of the dictatorship in the early 1990s, Chile has had governments on the center-left, governments on the center-right, and they've all advanced democracies and promoted policies that promoted the free market. It really is a model for how to use trade and investment to grow the economy in a way that is really the envy of all of Latin America. Yet recently we saw Chileans vote massively to reject a constitution that wanted to do away with that system. Not just details, but the entire system. And you were very brave in speaking out against that constitution, which I think most of us who have read, I've read part of it, not the whole thing, but the parts that I've read, I think it's a horrendous document. And the people of Chile who wanted a new constitution went out and voted overwhelmingly against this particular constitution. We saw prior to that riots in the streets in a way that we hadn't really seen in modern Chilean history. What's happening in Chile? Same question that I asked President Uribe. Should we be concerned about President Boric and what he's doing to Chile and its system?
Bueno, no es fácil de explicar, pero vamos a intentar.
Vamos. En 5 minutos o menos.
5 minutos. Yo creo que el principal problema de América Latina en los últimos 30, 40 años es la crisis política. Los partidos han ido perdiendo su poder frente a la ciudadanía, el desprestigio de la política es absoluto. Usted ve las encuestas de cualquier país de Latinoamérica y están las Fuerzas Armadas, están los bomberos, están la iglesia, y al final de la lista vienen los partidos políticos y los congresos. En el caso de Chile, creo que suma menos de 10 puntos de aprobación. Entonces, la crisis de la democracia se sostiene en las instituciones, en los partidos políticos, que son capaces de conducir, que son capaces de alinear a los países frente a grandes proyectos de futuro. Y eso no se está dando en América Latina. Y eso, lógicamente, lo han aprovechado ciertas ideologías para llevar la violencia, llevar la situación a los límites que no se puede tolerar. Y eso ha pasado en todos nuestros países de una u otra manera. En el caso de Chile, después que terminó la dictadura, tuvimos una coalición de partidos que estuvo prácticamente 30 años en el poder. Ayer conversaba con un periodista que en Miami le decía, nosotros tuvimos un ministro de Hacienda por cada gobierno de la Concertación. Un ministro de Hacienda. Y tuvimos una política que no lo cambió cada gobierno que llegó. El gran problema que tenemos hoy en Chile, que llegó un gobierno que ellos llaman refundacional, que rechazan la historia de Chile y quieren construir una nueva historia. Y los países que construyen una historia distinta, lógicamente mejorada, avanzada, de acuerdo a las nuevas realidades, tienen que basarse en lo que ha sido la historia. Si uno quiere desconocer la historia y quiere construir una historia nueva para construir el futuro, está perdido y va a tropezar siempre con la misma piedra. Y eso es lo que ha pasado. ¿Por qué el país quería una nueva constitución? Porque teníamos una constitución que nació en la dictadura, que no fue aprobada por nadie, y desde el año 94, 95, el 2000, yo hasta el 2010 presenté proyectos de reforma constitucional que nunca se aprobaron. Entonces llegó un momento que se produjo la violencia, porque es la manera de actuar en América Latina, y lo vemos en casi todos los países de Latinoamérica, desgraciadamente, vemos lo que está pasando en Perú, lo que pasó ayer en el evento en Ecuador, etcétera. Entonces dice uno, ¿por qué camino avanzamos? Y este ejemplo de la Constitución es claro de que se forma la constituyente, se eligen los convencionales, y esto fue copado por distintos grupos que construyeron una constitución que era totalmente lo que había sido diverso de la historia de Chile. Eliminaron los poderes del Estado, suprimieron el poder judicial, quisieron crear un sistema regional que no funcionaba, quisieron todos los símbolos patrios querían suprimirlo. Para más que contar, cuando vino el plebiscito para aprobar o rechazar esta Constitución, los pueblos originarios, que se suponían eran los grandes beneficiarios de la nueva Constitución, el 75% de los pueblos originarios votaron en contra, porque veían sus derechos totalmente peligrando frente a esta nueva realidad. Entonces, en el apruebo de hacer una nueva Constitución tuvo 70 y tantos %, pero después, en el proceso constituyente, hicieron una Constitución que tenía como 500 artículos, era como un árbol de Pascua o como una lista de supermercados que se iba a construir nunca. Y la gente comenzó a perder la confianza y, a mi juicio, más que criticar a las personas, porque aquí en general América Latina somos muy buenos para criticar a las personas con nombre y apellido, a los partidos, yo creo que uno tiene que tener respeto por la gente que se dedica al servicio público, porque es muy difícil hacerlo. Yo trabajé 20 años en una empresa privada y después me dediqué al servicio público. Llevo tantos años como el presidente Uribe y yo ya pasé los 80, así que todavía llevo hartos años
Yo
más.
llevo los de la noche también.
Día y noche. Entonces, en el caso de Chile, yo creo que hubo un rechazo amplio de toda la ciudadanía. Felizmente, el acuerdo constitucional tenía que ser ratificado por el Congreso y en el Congreso actual la mayoría no la tiene el gobierno. Entonces se ha desarrollado un nuevo proceso constitucional, hay un Consejo Constituyente de 50 personas, hay un grupo de expertos, hay todo un sistema que tiene que aprobarse en los próximos días, pero lo más importante de todo, que para este nuevo acuerdo constituyente que reemplazaba al anterior, se instalaron 12 puntos fundamentales. O sea, hay no digamos un decálogo, pero 12 puntos básicos para respetar en la nueva Constitución. De lo contrario, no va a pasar esa por el Congreso. Y si se llega a cambiar eso nuevamente, se va a rechazar. Porque el rechazo de la gente, y a mi juicio el gobierno cometió el error de que el gobierno tenía que ser un árbitro, tenía que dar todas las facilidades para que la gente conociera y no jugarse por una opción. Y eso lo derrotó. Entonces, todavía estamos en esa etapa. Yo espero que se entienda que, y en eso yo coincido con la actitud del presidente Uribe. Uno, y en el caso de un expresidente, no puede estar todos los días leyendo la lista de las defunciones ni cuándo vamos a ir al cementerio. Nosotros tenemos que mirar de otra manera el país. Tenemos que mirar en función de construir unidad, construir partidos políticos que sean capaces de sustentar esa unidad, construir una perspectiva. Lo decía Carlos respecto a Chile. Nosotros el año, hasta que prácticamente terminó la dictadura, éramos un país pequeño, muy pequeño, 20 millones de habitantes, que no teníamos lo que tenemos hoy día. Hoy día, como les decía, casi 2/3 todo el producto del comercio exterior de Chile, porque estamos en todos los continentes, un país de 20 millones. Ustedes ven en el mundo hoy día cuántas ciudades tienen más de 20 millones, miles hoy día. Entonces, un país pequeño tiene que tener sólidas instituciones, que se respete la justicia, que se respete la democracia, realmente que se respeten las instituciones y permitir que el país se vaya desarrollando. Y eso es lo que hay que entender. Y yo, desde mi punto de vista, así como fui el único presidente de la República que hablé por cadena de radio y televisión diciendo que había que rechazar la Constitución porque esta Constitución, tal como estaba, nos llevaba a lo que hemos vivido en nuestros países latinoamericanos. Con todas sus palabras dije, aquí vamos a una dictadura. Entonces, esto había que ser claro y rotundo. Ahora, en el caso del presidente elegido por votación popular en la elección, hay que colaborar. Yo trabajo en el tema de infraestructura, trabajo en el tema de políticas internacionales, activo en esta materia durante más de 20 y tantos años, y por eso apoyo todas las políticas de Estado que sean buenas para el país. Y me opongo a aquellas que considero que son malas para el país. Ahora, la diferencia de Chile, que desgraciadamente ha estado cambiando como toda América Latina, hasta hace algunos años no vivíamos esta situación. Yo recuerdo a mi padre cuando era presidente caminaba por las calles de Santiago. Yo todos los domingos iba al estadio de fútbol sin guardia. Eso hoy día es imposible, porque llegó la narcoviolencia. Llegaron los carteles de toda Centroamérica y otros países que se han instalado en nuestros países y hay una situación de inseguridad muy grande, cosa que nunca habíamos tenido. Y eso hay que resolverlo, porque si un país no es seguro, no hay tranquilidad para la población, para desarrollarse, para formar familia, para desarrollar los empleos, para desarrollar las empresas, lo que sea el trabajo, que es lo que importa, ahí no se puede hacer nada. Entonces, ese tema el país se tiene que resolver, de lo contrario no vamos a tener la posibilidad de retomar el camino que durante muchos años construimos para construir un país independiente, libre y soberano, que no se impongan las ideologías, sino que se impongan los grandes proyectos de país y las grandes tareas de Estado. Y eso es lo que estamos construyendo y yo creo que, y reitero, felizmente Chile nunca ha tenido los grandes conflictos que hemos visto en nuestros países. Nunca tuvimos la situación de Colombia, nunca tuvimos la situación de Venezuela, salvo la dictadura. Curiosamente, una dictadura que terminó de una manera bien especial, llamó a votación y perdió la votación. Y ahí se reconstituyó la democracia después de 26 años, 16 años. Perdón. Entonces, hay que actuar con visión de futuro, ayudando a los más desprotegidos, porque eso es lo fundamental, apoyando a las pequeñas y medianas empresas que no son como las grandes empresas que se pueden defender, ayudando a que el país sea más solidario, que el país sea más comprensivo de las situaciones en que está. Y, reitero, si no hay partidos políticos, no hay instituciones democráticas que funcionan, no hay democracia. No hay democracia. Y eso es fundamental.
Thank you. I want to retake the conversation we had about foreign policy and ask the three fellows here in the room the same question and a version of that question to Fawzia. One of the things that we hear when we invite former presidents, current presidents, policymakers from Latin America, we hear one common denominator, and that is that the United States for too long has ignored Latin America as a region, and that it's paying the price for ignoring Latin America as a region for forever, really. One region of the world that the United States has not really ignored is the Middle East, and not just the Middle East, but what is under the jurisdiction of the Central Command, which includes not just the Middle East, but broader, including, of course, Afghanistan and other parts of this very difficult neighborhood. And so I want to ask to the people here, the fellows here in the room, what can the U.S. do to really change that and begin to pay more attention to our own Western Hemisphere? And to Fawzia, because you come from a part of the world that the United States has not ignored, where there have been a lot of attention paid to your neighborhood, what can the U.S. do differently to really make things better, not only for people in your part of the world, but also to advance American interests? And I'll begin with you, Fawzia. What should we do differently in Afghanistan and the broader neighborhood?
We know that there is a rise of different regional powers in Asia and Central Asia and Middle East. You mentioned of China. Obviously, I guess China is benefiting mostly from the current crisis of Afghanistan, and also, I guess, with the conflict and war in Ukraine as well. They are slowly expanding their economic ties in Central Asia and South Asia. And I think that is, as I said before, minimizing the maneuvering power and the leverage the United States could have potentially for any future engagement with Afghanistan. I think what could be done differently in Afghanistan, because I know I'm often asked this question, that the United States was in Afghanistan militarily for 20 years, the NATO was there. There is no point in re-engaging while that was kind of a failed outcome. I think things could have been avoided and the failure could have been avoided. We could do things differently. I think if more time was just to look back and see what went wrong, I think a summary of what went wrong, one of that could be if more time could have been put on pressurizing the Taliban and their supporters and the countries that are supporting Taliban and in the region for a meaningful political dialogue, I think the outcome would have been different. Now, while we have lost enormously, the people of Afghanistan have not lost. I think the United States could still have leveraged their presence in the region. I think they need to really expand their engagement with Central Asian countries. Let's not forget that in 1996 to 2001, when Taliban first time came to power, no countries were engaging with Taliban meaningfully. Only 2 countries recognized Taliban then were Pakistan and UAE. But now, 1.5 years since Taliban taken over, no countries in the world or in the region recognize them, but there is a lot of engagement with them. We know that, for instance, 3 weeks back, the Chinese signed a contract with the Taliban buying one of our mines, natural resources, the gas. And the Central Asian countries as well are also trying to have an engagement which will have a political, not only political aspect, but also financial aspect. So I think what is left for the United States, obviously none of these countries, China or the Middle East like Qatar or Saudi Arabia, Central Asian countries, none of them actually can fill the vacuum that is created from the absence of the US and the Europe, the Western world, so to say, when it comes especially on the record of human rights and women's rights and democracy, etc. I think what can the United States do to make things happen differently? First of all, support meaningfully an alternative for Taliban. When I say an alternative including Taliban. But let Afghans lead that process. Recognize and appreciate Afghan leadership and ownership. And you have all the leverage. You have a huge level of political opposition, civic activists, women's rights activists who have fled Afghanistan, and they are either in the United States, in the region, or in Europe, that they could be used as a leverage, but they don't have a space. The women movement that have started in Afghanistan, they don't literally have any space, while we know that Taliban were given an office and the space in 2011 to operate from Qatar. So I think with the growth of the regional dynamics and politics, the United States must really look at its role or revisit its role in the region and engage meaningfully with the political opposition for an alternative. Because my fear is that Taliban longer presence in Afghanistan, although the narrative they were trying to sell to the international community and to the world is that the Taliban are the only group that will defeat Daesh, ISIS-K. But in reality, Taliban presence actually promote the growth of military extremism in the region, in Central Asia, in South Asia, and eventually can pose a security threat to the world. So I think taking that situation light probably is not in the interest of anyone. And therefore, I think a political engagement at this stage for an alternative is what the United States could do. Because I know many of you in the US think that Afghanistan is a failed story. You don't even want to hear about it, which is not going to help us in long term, because that vacuum is there. And we don't want China or any other country in the region to become a substitute for United States, because eventually when the US troops left from Bagram Air Base, as I mentioned on the 4th of July, in one of my interventions on one of the mainstream media, I said, I don't know in 2 years' time which flag is going to be there hanging in Bagram Air Base. We definitely don't want to see one of those countries in the region flag to hang around that area. And in order to avoid that, I think a meaningful engagement with a strategy, long-term strategy beyond humanitarian aid, but focusing on a political settlement is, I think, a way forward. Thank you.
That's really, really important. And I hear from Latin American leaders the same thing, right? We don't want to have the Chinese come in, but if the U.S. creates a vacuum, right, somebody's going to step in. And I like how you called it meaningful engagement, because it shows that it's not just about paying attention to a region, it is doing it in a smart way that advances the interests of both that region and the United States. So if I can ask the fellows here, if there's one thing that you think the U.S. could do to really not just pay attention to Latin America, but do it in a meaningful way, in a way that would advance Chile's interests, Colombia's interests, the interests of the specific country that we're talking about, whatever that is, and the United States, what would that thing do? If we were back in the State Department, what would you do?
I think we need fairly urgently an Atlantic strategy that rivals the Indo-Pacific strategy that's now a bipartisan activity. We haven't had anything like an Atlantic strategy probably in our history. I don't think the Monroe Doctrine would qualify. But if you think of the 80-odd littoral states among Europe, the African continent, and then in North and South America, and not just the littoral ones, but those that are like-minded in the democratic West, there's a lot that we have in common. And especially in North and South America, values, history, shared history, the need to compete with China, as you said, which has moved into the region. If we focus on nearshoring and reshoring, that means we have to work
really important
with the Americas. In particular, we can't do it alone. Some of that reshoring will end up in Central America, not just in the U.S. So I think this idea of an Atlantic strategy that brings together nations around common values and interest would be a major contribution to putting Latin America permanently on the radar of the State Department and U.S. foreign policy.
I think taking advantage of nearshoring is an incredibly important idea that could help both the region and the United States. President Uribe, any one thing that you think the United States could do to enhance our ties to the region? Any new Plan Colombia type idea?
For one specific country, Venezuela. Venezuela, the current dictator of Venezuela, he wants to consolidate his dictatorship through the coming year elections. They think that with the support of the United States, once they win, as they expect, they will say, we won in a transparent elections. If the United States does not guarantee transparency in the coming elections, we are going to have a much more complexity with the complex problems with the dictatorship of Venezuela. Negotiation without the guarantee of transparent elections would damage the region. The second point is international crime. The United States cannot abandon the leadership in the fight against international crime. In my country, we have regions with criminal, illegal, alternative powers that have displaced the rule of law. But it is not new. With all my excuses, since the year 2002, we began to see the re-emergence of these illegal powers. But not only in Colombia. Look at Ecuador. And you have to relate yesterday election outcomes in Ecuador, as President Frei has already referred to, with narco-trafficking. Look at some cities in Argentina. The power of international crime in Rosario, in Santa Fe. Look at some regions in Bolivia and in Central American countries. Today, the illegal powers are a much more hard problem. Today is not a problem of delinquency. Today is a problem with the capacity to displace the rule of law. Mexico, for example. In Mexico, they do not have a simple problem of narco-trafficking. They have a competitor of the rule of law. The United States cannot abandon the fight against the international crime.
Thank you. President Frei?
Es duro decirlo, pero yo pienso que en un horizonte de 50 años, por lo menos mirado desde el punto de vista de Chile, no hemos tenido una política de Estados Unidos permanente, continua, con objetivos, con metas. Yo asumí el año 94 y a los pocos meses participé en la cumbre de APEC en Indonesia y Chile ingresó a APEC. Hoy día APEC representa casi el 60% de todo nuestro comercio exterior. Y en el mes siguiente, diciembre del 94, se desarrolló aquí la primera cumbre
Miami.
en Miami. Y Chile fue invitado por Estados Unidos, Canadá y México y ser el cuarto socio del Tratado de Libre Comercio. 94. El Congreso de Estados Unidos lo tuvo detenido hasta el año 2004, donde se reinició. Habían pasado 10 años, nosotros no podíamos estar mirando
Claro.
el techo. Ya teníamos acuerdo con México, con Canadá. Canadá firmamos tratado el año 67, fue el primer tratado que un país desarrollado firmó con América Latina. Firmamos un tratado con Corea. Corea nunca había firmado tratado de libre comercio. Entonces, en esa visión me tocó vivir todas las experiencias entre el 94 y el 2000 de todas las cumbres de las Américas, una que fue en Paraguay, que fue desastrosa, porque la postura, sencillamente no puedo decir que nos lo dijeron a los presidentes, tanto que tuvimos que presentar todo un reclamo formal por lo que se estaba proponiendo. Cuando vine a Estados Unidos, yo hablé ante el Congreso y dije, yo no voy a pedir nada. Vengo aquí, pero no voy a pedir nada. No podemos venir a llorar aquí migajas, sino que tenemos que venir a definir lo que queremos como país y, lógicamente, como queremos en América Latina. Entonces, eso a mí me tocó en los años del presidente Clinton, pero no hubo caso que el Congreso nos diera la posibilidad de hacer un tratado de libre comercio. Y así hemos visto tantas situaciones que son distintas a las de Afganistán o las que son de Colombia, pero lo que sí decía el presidente Uribe, yo lo comparto. Hoy día, América Latina, hay una presencia de narcotráfico muy avanzada en todos los países y con gran poder, interviniendo en la política. Entonces, esas son las grandes líneas que creo yo que Estados Unidos tiene que asumir. Consolidar la democracia, ser claro respecto a los países que están en problemas, pero básicamente tenemos que, para enfrentar el futuro, tenemos que tener una claridad de qué es lo que se piense. Yo, en general, por lo menos en la última elección presidencial, no vi en los planteamientos de los candidatos a presidente de Estados Unidos, y en general no lo he visto en estos años, postura frente a lo que es la realidad latinoamericana y cómo podemos enfrentarla en el mediano y largo plazo, porque esto no se resuelve en una facilidad.
I have two more questions, but I hope that we can have answers in a sentence or less so we can have questions from the audience. In this cohort of fellows, we have two former presidents, a former vice president of parliament, somebody who worked at the highest levels in the State Department, in the heart of the State Department, making policy recommendations that affect the United States of America. You all have power. What do you miss most about being in power? I'll start with President Frei. A sentence or less, a few words. What do you miss most about the power of the presidency?
¿Extraño hoy día?
Sí. ¿Qué extraña del poder?
Yo aprendí en mi casa, porque en Chile no había casa presidencial. Mi padre vivía en su casa, yo también viví en mi casa cuando fui presidente, y lo que aprendí es que el presidente se iba a la presidencia y volvía a su misma casa sin ninguna pompa ni grandiosidad. Pero eran otros tiempos. No había este aparato, celulares, no había digital. Eso es prácticamente a fines de la década del 90, comienzo del 2000. Cambió el mundo, cambió el sistema, cambió la manera de relacionarnos. En esa época era más fácil poder trabajar. Yo tenía en mi época 4 hijas en la universidad y nunca tuvieron problemas. Ni siquiera tenía que ir con guardia a la universidad. Eso hoy día es imposible. No podrían ir. Entonces, el poder tiene un sentido para algunos que es mirarlo de una manera negativa. Yo creo que si yo tuviera que decir que he hecho de menos de eso, tener la posibilidad de tomar decisiones que vayan en ciertas direcciones. Pero no para un interés personal, sino para un
Pueblo.
País y un desarrollo de la nación chilena. Y por eso, lógicamente, que estoy preocupado con la situación actual y sigo trabajando y luchando como lo he hecho todavía.
Senator, governor, president for 8 years. What do you miss about power?
I remember one British historian. He used to say that there are presidential candidates wanting to take power. Others are wanting to do well, good governance. I would prefer the second. Along my life, I have worked in a country with independent institutions. I never thought to exercise control on the justice administration, on the electoral body, on the bodies for disciplinary control of the government. Therefore, I did always consider that my job was to exercise my duties as president, not to take on power. At my age, I have preferred to support young leaders instead of looking for personal aspirations that I do not have at this moment. My concern is, are we going to have new leaders capable to defend the rule of law effectively? My concern at this moment is not the power, is what is the new people my country has to defend the rule of law and to consolidate it.
And what they can do with that power. Dr. Skinner?
A couple of things. One, you can move the needle faster and sometimes more concretely when you're in government, and you really realize it when you leave government, as important as civil society is. You just don't have the levers at your disposal in that way. And then also, I think, this era has been so tumultuous in American politics the last decade or so, and our presidential races are really global presidential races. Everyone's watching. And I found that I had a talent I didn't know I had, and that was to be a low-level therapist for our allies around the world by just saying, it will be okay. we have historical ties, we have ties around values and principles, and those will endure. That seemed to work a lot. I think I have a new profession.
I thought you were going to say a therapist for the Secretary of State, but that's a different, that's a different story. Being a powerful woman in a position of power in Afghanistan has to be really, really hard. What do you miss most about power?
Well, I think I miss more when I was giving hard time to some of these main ministers. But honestly, beyond that, it depends on how you define power. For me, the fact that I'm not in my country, I'm not surrounded by my people, although virtually I am always, but physically I'm not in country, it's that sense of powerlessness, really. Because power is not only about position, and power is not also about having, elite argumental or philosophy discussion, but being on the ground, being with the people, trying to change their life, being in touch with them, being in the room, having that sensation. Those are the things I really miss about my country and about the people, because I can do things still from outside, but when you are on the ground, when you are leading the change in your community, when you are moving people with you around that change, when you are mobilizing people, that is true leadership. And that was my style of work, to be with people, to be connected. Because if you are really striving for a change, you need to be the agent for that change. You need to be demonstrating alongside with people for that change. And if you are not, then that is like a very elite style of leadership, which I was always with people. And that's something I really, really miss every day when I wake up.
And speaking of people, now we're talking about young people. I want to conclude before I turn it over to you for questions with the same question I ask in each one of these events. We have a room full of young people who might want to enter public service one day, be public servants, run for office perhaps, be advisors to presidents and other people who are in elected positions or appointed positions. Yet, when you turn on the news or read the paper, you hear a lot about the negativity. In a couple of your cases, your lives have been physically threatened by being in that line of work. What do you say to inspire them to enter public service, to really make a difference rather than look the other way and do nothing? Because really the negativity surrounding this line of work is overwhelming. What do you tell them? President Frei? 30 seconds or less.
30 segundos menos. Yo creo que yo he tenido diversas actividades, como digo, por mi vida familiar, por mi vida, yo soy ingeniero civil, y lo que más me ha entusiasmado en el trabajo es compromiso con las personas, con las sociedades, con la gente. La gente espera de sus autoridades mucho más de lo que muchas veces le damos. Entonces, la persona que le gustaría participar en una actividad política tiene que siempre pensar en que es su servicio a los demás. Si uno cree que uno va al poder a beneficiarse, bueno, algunos se han beneficiado y han salido con hartos millones de dólares en el bolsillo. Y desgraciadamente en América Latina tenemos muchos ejemplos que podríamos dar. Felizmente en mi caso familiar, como digo, y en el caso personal, yo he estado 50 años en la actividad política y nunca he tenido ni siquiera un juicio, ni una palabra, nunca he tenido un caso de que me acusaran de cualquier usufructo del poder. Y en ese sentido, si uno está dispuesto, tiene que pensar eso, servir a la comunidad, servir al país, con sus grandes tareas, sus grandes definiciones, y nunca estar mirando el interés personal. Si uno no toma así el servicio público...
Compromiso, entonces.
Compromiso no hay muy difícil.
Presidente Uribe.
One and single recommendation: to do the job with love.
Love.
Love. When you work in politics or in whatever activity with love, led by love, in politics, you are going to be transparent, honest, you are going to work with dedication and with one single aim: to serve the community.
How do you
Love.
top that?
Love is the key word for me.
That's hard to top.
It is. I think it begins and ends with hope. And if you believe the West is a project worth preserving and expanding, there's a lot of work to do, but it starts with hope.
So commitment, love, hope. Fawzia, you get the last word before the audience asks questions.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was great joining this panel. I think one thing that I would suggest to anyone, I always give this to my daughters. I have two daughters, and I tell them that only do things that you're passionate about it. Don't do things just because you want to do things, but do things that you believe in it. And the moment you started believing it, trust me, everybody else will believe in what you do and your cause. But that passion does not come without any cost. It comes with a cost. You have to be able to pay that cost and the price. You have to be brave enough to face that. Because many people, remember, across the world, in different parts of the world, they are taking the risk with their lives. So we are taking so many of our liberties and rights for granted. When you are taking that something with passion and you believe in and you want to change, if there are risks with it, think about those people in the other parts of the world who are taking that risk with their lives. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so let's turn it over to the audience. And by the way, as people begin to formulate their questions, if any of you have questions for the other ones, if President Uribe, you have a question for President Frei, or anybody who has a question for each other, please shout it out. All right. Yes, and we have the microphone. Yeah, right here. No, there we go.
I'd like to ask a question of President Uribe in Spanish, and I hope that he will answer in Spanish, among other things, because he's like my favorite person answering questions in Spanish of all time.
He speaks Spanish, so we're good.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Presidente Uribe, un honor hacerle esta pregunta. Después, su antiguo ministro de Defensa, quien se hizo presidente Santos, cuando empezó a negociar con las FARC, usted se opuso muy públicamente a esa decisión, y en este país yo estaba de acuerdo con usted, muchos estábamos de acuerdo con usted, porque no se debería nunca negociar con terroristas. Pero al final hubo un acuerdo de paz y el presidente Santos ganó el premio Nobel por ese acuerdo de paz. ¿Quién tuvo razón?
¿Quién tuvo razón? Wow.
Es muy difícil hacer un resumen del tema. Nosotros algo habíamos mejorado en Colombia. A mí no me gusta hablar de grandes logros, porque hablar de grandes logros en países con pobreza hace que los ciudadanos se sientan mal. Nosotros algo mejoramos a Colombia, por eso hablábamos de 3 huevitos. Nunca dijimos histórico, inédito, paralelo. Hablamos de 3 semillas: seguridad con valores democráticos, avance de la inversión privada, reducción de la pobreza, avance de las políticas sociales, una gran reducción del Estado burocrático. El presidente que me sucedió se eligió con esas banderas. Y después hubo un cambio brutal que no le dijo al país en el proceso electoral. Nosotros no nos oponemos a negociaciones. De hecho, el gobierno que yo presidí desmovilizó 53,000 integrantes de grupos terroristas. Pero una cosa es la negociación y otra es la claudicación. ¿Cuáles fueron los principales puntos a los cuales nosotros nos opusimos? Hubo impunidad total. Incluso la impunidad total comprende impunidad total frente a delitos atroces, como el reclutamiento y la violación de niños. Hubo elegibilidad política para personas responsables de delitos atroces. Si usted mira los países de Occidente, aún en España, que sería el más permisivo en esa materia, no les dan la elegibilidad política sino cuando hayan cumplido penas, inclusive la parte privativa de la libertad y la parte de libertad condicional. Y hubo una gran permisividad con la criminalidad del narcotráfico. Yo nunca he hablado de guerra contra las drogas, he hablado de derrota del crimen, que aquí vamos a hablar con los estudiantes del impacto de las drogas en el medio ambiente y en toda la selva amazónica. En el año 2013, Colombia había reducido las plantaciones de drogas a 42, 48 mil hectáreas. En ese acuerdo de La Habana se tomó la decisión, el gobierno entonces aceptó, que la droga no era delito para FARC, era una fuente de financiación política, que entonces no habría cárcel ni extradición, que habría elegibilidad política y que no habría fumigación. Eso fue un tipping point. Colombia entró en una etapa de reversa y llegó a 220 mil hectáreas de droga. Ese gobierno perdió el plebiscito contra toda la opinión mundial que estaba a favor de ese plebiscito. Prometieron que si se perdía el plebiscito no habría acuerdo. Nosotros dijimos la noche que ganó el no, nosotros también queremos la paz, simplemente pedimos un acuerdo nacional para modificar textos. No se hizo y hubo un golpe de Estado, porque aprobaron ese acuerdo en contra del plebiscito sin tramitar un proyecto de ley, sin otro plebiscito, sin una reforma constitucional, simplemente con una mera proposición en el Congreso. ¿Cuál ha sido el resultado? Si el actual gobierno dirigido por el presidente Petro está proponiendo la paz total, si ese acuerdo de paz de Santos hubiera resultado, no habría necesidad de hacerlo. Pero el acuerdo de paz de Santos produjo muchos más delincuentes de los que desmovilizó. Ahí están las cuentas, queridos amigos. Entonces, a mí me reclaman muchos colombianos, me dicen, Uribe, votamos por el no, ¿y ustedes qué hicieron? Hicimos lo que la Constitución nos permitía. Nosotros no podíamos subvertir el orden constitucional y elegimos un presidente joven, el más inteligente, el más preparado para cambiar esos acuerdos. No se dio. Usted queda al menos, ¿cómo le digo? No le voy a decir que acepte mi respuesta. Tampoco le voy a decir que le parezca buena. Pero he tratado de tener toda la sinceridad con usted. Hace poco, en una cita universitaria en Valencia, España, dije, ese acuerdo tuvo malos consejeros. En mi concepto no se puede hacer acuerdos de paz con grupos terroristas cuando los mediadores tienen la misma orientación ideológica de los grupos terroristas. Los mediadores fueron Venezuela y Cuba. El presidente de la época dijo, léanme mis labios, hay líneas rojas, no habrá elegibilidad de terroristas, irán a la cárcel. Todas esas líneas rojas se violaron. Yo de pronto, hombre, uno cuando está en la etapa política con espíritu democrático, no siempre piensa mal. Por eso por ahí en Valencia, España, dije, ¿será que los mediadores sesgados fueron los que influyeron para que se rompieran, se violaran las líneas rojas? Pero hizo mucho daño. No, yo no estoy en desacuerdo en que se negocie con el ELN. Habrá una impunidad total que dé mal ejemplo. Es que el problema de la impunidad total no es capricho. El problema de la impunidad total es que impacta la psicología colectiva. Produce una actitud de desprecio por la ley, por el orden. Difícil tema, querido amigo. Uribe, ¿qué hiciste? Ayudar a elegir un presidente joven que cambiara eso. Yo no goberné.
Next question. See if we can get it. Yeah. Right here. Yeah, right here. If you don't mind, tell your name and remember that questions end in a question mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sebastián Redondo. I'm from Colombia. I want to say, first of all, thank you, President Uribe, for what you've done with Colombia during your 2 terms. My question is for all the members in the panel. For my understanding, when you incentivize financially weak democracies, regimes, these do not change. With Venezuela, what's happening right now, we see Chevron going in, we see already pre-established American and foreign companies already activating their operations in Venezuela. Will this legitimize the power of Nicolas Maduro and its regime? And will this apply for Afghanistan and other weak democracies and regimes? Thank you so much.
Anybody? Shout it out. Presidente?
In my opinion, Venezuela has two economies at this moment. The formal economy and the informal illegal economy. The formal economy has come down from $500 million, 500 billones de dólares, $500 billion, down to in between 60 and 100. But on the other side, the illegal economy seems to bring prosperity to a country because of narco trafficking, corruption, illegal mining, and one point that I want to discuss in this university, remittances. I have not the numbers of remittances for the year 2022, but in accordance with the report of the World Bank, in the year 2021, Latin America received $150 billion in remittances. Venezuela, roughly speaking, 8 billion. It is a lot of money. My question is not the fact of remittances. My question is, what is the democratic compensation for remittances? This country sends remittances to Cuba, to Venezuela, to Nicaragua. And instead of recovering democracy, those countries consolidate dictators. Therefore, you ask for the reactivation of USA corporations, of their activities in Venezuela. This is one problem, without democratic compensation. And the other problem is the coming elections. Will the United States require and supervise that in the coming elections there will be true transparency in Venezuela? It is a great challenge for this country.
Anybody else want to weigh in? No? All right. If not, we'll go to the next question. Yes, back there. Say your name and your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Rincon. I'm a junior here at FIU. I'm currently doing research on China's political engagement within Latin America. So naturally, my question is to both Presidente Frei y Presidente Uribe. In your opinion, or have you noticed a specific prominent presence of China within a specific sector or area of your country?
En general, en la área económica.
Sí.
¿Ah?
Sí, presencia china en Chile.
Ya. Nosotros, como señalé anteriormente, el año 94 ingresamos a APEC, que ocupa todos los países del mundo más desarrollado en el mundo moderno, digamos. Y cuando ingresamos había 14 países, hoy día hay 20, y como es un organismo que no tiene burocracia, las reuniones se llaman reuniones de líderes, era el lugar adecuado para que tomáramos contacto con los países con los cuales queríamos abrir comercio y establecer oportunidades para las empresas chilenas y crear nuevos mercados. En ese sentido fuimos construyendo, como dije anteriormente, tratados de libre comercio con la mayoría de los países de APEC. Después, paralelamente, como dije, con los países de Canadá, México y prácticamente con todos los países latinoamericanos. Se discutió mucho en Chile el tema del ingreso a Mercosur, que es un acuerdo económico que ha funcionado, a mi juicio, de manera deficiente. Y yo veo que en general en la política latinoamericana construimos acuerdos políticos, pero no acuerdos para proceder a una integración como se hace, por ejemplo, en la Unión Europea, que es un gran ejemplo. Entonces, en América Latina cada país hace lo que puede, cada país hace lo que quiere, sin ninguna solidaridad entre nosotros en el marco internacional. Entonces, en ese cuadro, nosotros hemos buscado la máxima amplitud de comercio y de inversiones. Nosotros tenemos países como Estados Unidos, que tienen las grandes transnacionales que también invierten en Chile. En los últimos años hemos tenido y ha comenzado, producto del intercambio que tenemos con los países del Asia, Japón, China, Corea y ASEAN, que siempre nunca lo miramos muy en serio. Son 10 países del sudeste asiático, donde está Singapur, donde está Tailandia, donde está Malasia, donde está Vietnam, donde está la sede, digamos, de toda esta operación es en Singapur, que es un país muy desarrollado, muy pequeño, pero que hace de gran eslabón, tanto en lo financiero como en lo de infraestructura para desarrollar todo el sudeste asiático. Y nosotros prácticamente tenemos tratados con todos los países del sudeste asiático. Nos falta Myanmar, que no hemos logrado, y Laos y Camboya, que tenemos primeros acuerdos y tenemos embajadas concurrentes. Entonces, nosotros recibimos las oportunidades de comercio en todo el mundo. Como dije al comienzo, un país de 20 millones no puede darse el lujo de pelear con nadie, sino que estamos en bien pie con todos los países. Acabamos de firmar un acuerdo, y lo hizo el gobierno de Chile, a pesar de que no quería hacerlo, ratificar un tratado con la Unión Europea, que era renovar el tratado que teníamos desde el año 2001-2002, que estaba aprobado por el Congreso y que estaba paralizado. Para Chile siempre la Unión Europea ha sido una importante fuente de no solamente inversión, sino que de cultura. Nuestro continente nació de Europa, digamos. Y entonces, en esa manera de mirar las cosas, hemos recibido inversiones en los distintos sectores. ¿Qué es lo que ponemos como condición? Que se cumpla con las leyes chilenas. Y punto. Y tenemos un sistema de concesiones que se hacen para infraestructura, que se hacen para los sistemas sanitarios, que se hacen para desarrollar toda la infraestructura digital. Hoy día, por ejemplo, estamos en el 5G y en esos casos las empresas que participan son licitaciones internacionales y concesiones a mediano y largo plazo. Y por lo tanto recibimos inversión extranjera que no trate de menoscabar nuestro sistema económico, menos distribuir las libertades y la democracia en Chile. Y que no está de acuerdo se tiene que ir, ¿no?
Colombia is not a mining country, for we do not export minerals to China, as the case of Chile and other South American countries. We are an importing country of apparels, textiles from China. These imports create huge problems with Colombian producers. During my life, I have seen 2 stages of China in our countries. When I was young, as you are, at my university, what we read about China was one magazine. Its name was Red China. It was a propaganda of the communist regime led by Mao Zedong. I never thought that China would have the full change that it has had. For example, during the last 20 years, what we have seen of China is economic interest. We have not seen yet notorious political interest of China in our countries. Not much. But there are some expressions, and I prefer that China reduces its participation in our country for economic terms in accordance with our legislations, as President Frei has said to us. In Colombia, they have public contracts for public works assigned in open bids by different levels of government under the Colombian legislation. But in Ecuador and in Venezuela, China has become a supplier of loans, of a lending country. My concern is not that China provide these countries with loans. My concern is because they do not respect the international agreements, the international financial agreements. Therefore, if you see any country, whatever you consider in Latin America, if this country has problem with the IMF, with the IDB, with the World Bank, it doesn't matter if China comes with money. The concern is not the money, it's the lack of respect for the international financial legislation.
We have time for one more question. And remember, these fellows will be here for the next 3 months, so you can sign up for their classes. Dr. Skinner's class.
I will be here for some days every month.
Right. No, but
because
over the next 3 months.
I cannot leave Colombia. I have to fight in politics every day, especially at this at this hard moment.
But their classes will be over the next 3 months.
Colombians don't not allow me to come here in vacation.
No. Dr. Skinner's class began today. President Uribe's and President Frei's class begins tomorrow. Both classes begin tomorrow. And they'll each teach 8 sessions. So you have plenty of opportunities to meet them in person. So let's do one more question, and then we'll call it a day. If we can get right here. Yes, you. Thank you. Make it an inspiring question to conclude the session. No pressure.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacobo. I'm from Colombia. My question is for President Uribe, and it's in Spanish. First of all, thank you, President Uribe, for fighting against communism and socialism. My question is, ¿por qué la sociedad de hoy en día, yo como joven veo con preocupación la sociedad y mi juventud que está girando a la izquierda y al comunismo y al socialismo y son manipulables frente a estos sistemas de gobierno que han sido probados fallidos en todo el mundo? So, mi pregunta es, ¿por qué la sociedad hoy en día es tan manipulable y no tiene conciencia sobre el trabajo que usted hizo en Colombia? Porque, en mi opinión, usted es el mejor presidente que ha tenido la historia republicana de Colombia. Gracias.
No, hombre, a usted muchas gracias. Yo no solamente estoy de acuerdo con el comunismo en las formas en que trata de presentarse en nuestros días, que yo lo llamo neocomunismo, sino con los errores de las democracias latinoamericanas. Por ejemplo, si usted ve el nivel de desempleo juvenil en América Latina, usted tiene que entender las ansiedades, las rabias de los jóvenes. Si usted ve el nivel de falta de seguridad, usted tiene que entender la inconformidad de las personas. Si usted ve el nivel de pobreza, lo mismo. A mí me parece que nosotros hemos fallado para resolver problemas a tiempo. Y la solución que ha llegado en algunas partes, como es la solución socialista, es todavía más dañina. Yo invito a ver los dos fenómenos. Yo no puedo entender el bienestar social sin toda la fuerza de la empresa privada. Pero tampoco puedo entender la empresa privada si no se crea bienestar social. Son dos elementos mutuamente dependientes. Por ejemplo, yo ahora creo que nosotros tenemos que darle en esos países una respuesta a la juventud. Es una educación más aplicable. Los muchachos le dicen a uno en países como Colombia, y lo he oído en otros países de la región, yo no quiero estar 3, 5, 7 años en una universidad y pasar esos 7 años pobres sin trabajar. Nos están pidiendo unos esquemas educativos que les enseñen trabajos útiles en corto tiempo. Por ejemplo, como el manejo de una plataforma, que tenga posibilidades de emprendimiento de trabajo sin que ahí los congelen académicamente. Sería parte de lo que llamamos ciclos académicos propedéuticos, que tú en 6 meses aprendas algo útil para trabajar, pero que haya también unos esquemas públicos y privados que te presten para emprender. Pero no basta con una política de juventud. Si a ti te prestan para emprender en un país que no tenga confianza, dirán, Colombia es muy bueno para trabajar con jóvenes, tienen posibilidades de emprendimiento, pero en ese país no tengo confianza, no me atrevo a invertir. O se necesita la confianza general del país, en el país, y la política específica de los jóvenes. Y que al joven no lo estanquen, porque si uno habla en América Latina, solamente 6 meses de enseñanza para aprender a manejar una herramienta útil, moderna. Le dice, va a condenar a los pobres a manejar un computador. Entonces tiene que ser una concepción de ciclos propedéuticos que le permitan trabajar, emprender rápidamente y al mismo tiempo seguir acumulando periodos de enseñanza para llegar a los niveles superiores. Hombre, muchas gracias, me compromete más. No quiero que mi familia lo escuche a usted porque dice, ay, animaron a mi papá a seguir.
So you just get a flavor for what... I think you were able to get a flavor for what these 4 amazing fellows have to offer in their classes. If you're an FIU student, go to freedom.fiu.edu and click on the tab that says 4 students. You can sign up for their classes. 3 of them begin this week, and 1 of them will begin hopefully very, very soon. They're all going to be in person, 8 sessions, and we look forward to seeing you at their classes and at our future events. Thank you so much, each one of you, and to all of you for being here. Thank you.